First of all, we would like to express our gratitude to the leadership of Saudi Arabia for the opportunity to hold a meeting of Russian and American representatives. We expressed this gratitude personally to the Crown Prince of the Kingdom, Mohammed bin Salman. When together with Yuri Ushakov we had an audience with him, talked for about an hour about our bilateral relations, and how important it is to ensure in the world, if not complete agreement, it is impossible, but at least the readiness of the great powers in any situation to maintain a normal professional dialogue, and try to listen to each other, and, accordingly, learn lessons from what is happening, and avoid any conflicts and crises.
Уроки из происходящего и не допускать каких-то конфликтов и кризисов.
This position of the Crown Prince was, in fact, reproduced in our negotiations with the American side, where Marco Rubio, at the beginning of our conversation, emphasized the fundamental importance in international relations for each country to be guided by its national interests.
В международных отношениях для каждой страны руководствоваться своими национальными интересами.
We fully agreed with this. We also agreed that these national interests will not always, far from always coincide. But when they do not coincide, it is very important to regulate these discrepancies, not to let them take their course. And even more so not to provoke a confrontation of military and any other kind, but when national interests coincide. It is necessary to do everything possible to combine and implement mutually beneficial projects in these areas of efforts, both in the geopolitical spheres and in economic affairs. I find it very useful. We not only listened, but also heard each other, and I have reason to believe that the American side has become better aware of our position, which we have once again stated in detail, on the basis of President Putin's repeated speeches, using concrete examples, the agreements we have reached. The first and probably the most urgent, and even more so not the most difficult, is to ensure the early appointment of Russian ambassadors to the United States and the United States in Russia. The second is to remove the obstacles that for many years, first of all, the Biden administration has been building on the direction of our diplomatic missions over the past 4 years, seriously hindering their work, the endless expulsion of our diplomats, to which we had to respond, the continuing problems of the seizure of our real estate, and much, much more. Not the last problem is bank transfers, which they are trying to restrict us. Naturally, we reciprocate. So it was agreed that our deputies will arrange a meeting in the very near future, and will consider the need to eliminate these artificial barriers in the work of embassies and other foreign countries. Institutions in Russia in the United States and the United States in Russia, and not concentrating on any particular manifestation of these repons, but will try to approach systematically, which will put an end to these inconveniences forever, which really complicate the development of everyday normal relations. The second agreement was agreed that a process on the Ukrainian settlement will be formed in the near future. The American side will inform us who will represent Washington in this work, and as soon as we find out the name and position of the corresponding representative, as President Putin told President Trump, we will immediately designate our participant in this process. And third, in broad conceptual terms, to create conditions as the processes related to the settlement of the crisis in Ukraine. In parallel, to create conditions for our cooperation to resume in full and expand into a variety of areas.
Наше сотрудничество возобновилось в полном объеме, и расширилось на самые разные сферы.
There was a great interest, which we share, in resuming consultations on geopolitical issues, including various conflicts in various parts of the world, where both the United States and Russia have interests. And there was a great interest in removing artificial obstacles to the development of mutually beneficial economic cooperation.
Снять искусственные преграды на пути развития взаимовыгодного экономического сотрудничества.
Kirill Dmitriev, the head of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, attended the discussion of the economic aspects of our meeting today, and also presented some problems that could be resolved quite quickly for the benefit of Russia and the United States.
Проблемы, которые могли бы с пользой для России и для Соединенных Штатов быть достаточно оперативно урегулированы. Пожалуйста, вопросы.
And Alexander Kristenko, Russia Channel, Vchurk. Different assessments are being made now, mostly positive, and they are already being received from the American side. Still, I would like to clarify on which track the US positions on Russian-American or Ukrainian have been brought closer together the most. Has it also been possible to prepare the basis for, to lay the groundwork for a meeting between the presidents of Russia and the United States, and, in general, what are the next steps? Will you have meetings in the near future? And, by the way, the Secretary of State said that concessions will be required from everyone on the Ukrainian track, and all participants, if any understandings. As for the issues on which mutual understanding has been achieved, this does not necessarily mean bringing positions closer. But I have already said this. We have practically agreed that it is necessary to solve once and for all the problem of the functioning of our diplomatic missions, and on issues of our dialogue, and on international affairs, and on economic relations. There is a mutual desire to find concrete solutions.
Обозначено обоюдное стремление находить конкретные решения.
As for the Ukrainian issue, I mentioned the agreement that the Americans will appoint their representative, and we will reciprocate. After that, the relevant consultations will begin, and will be of a regular nature. There's something else I've missed. Did you manage to pawn the negotiations? We met by the decision of the presidents, who agreed to work towards the preparation of the next summit, and for this purpose. The foreign minister instructed the national security advisors to meet and see what needs to be worked out, before the presidents can begin to agree on a specific date and timing of the summit.
Перед тем, как президенты могут начать договариваться о конкретной дате и сроках проведения саммита.
Sergey Viktorovich Egger-Piskunov. I can't help but ask, immediately after the meeting, a lot of information went out, referring to some sources close to the diplomatic process, about a certain three-stage plan that Russia allegedly agreed with the United States on Ukraine. Is it true? And the second question, if possible, before this meeting. The United States sent such an interesting questionnaire to the European Union, where they asked what Europe could offer in terms of providing some kind of security guarantees in Ukraine. There is a question about the introduction of a contingent on the territory of Ukraine. How do they relate to this? As for the first question about a three-point plan, I have not seen this information. I have not seen these messages. However, today, when I was running through the news, I found a link to the statement of Polish Foreign Minister Radokai Sikorski, who told somewhere on the sidelines of Munich that he had met with us Representative Keith Kellogg. And Kellogg informed him about a settlement plan. There were not 3 points for, but Sikorski, commenting on this plan, said that he could not disclose details.
Но Сикорский, комментируя этот план, сказал, что он не может раскрыть детали.
The plan is atypical, but it can be very interesting. I asked Rubio and us today, what does this mean? They said it was fake. The second question is floating information that the Americans have asked the European Union a number of questions, in order, as said, To better understand what the European Union is going to do and how the Americans can be useful or involved here, I mentioned this, but also mentioned that specifically the topic is about the potential deployment of some armed forces, for example. Supposedly, after the conflict has already been settled or an agreement has been reached, the contingents, as mentioned in this paper, are of interest to the Americans from the point of view of which countries are ready to provide them. But it is clear that the question is addressed to the members of the European Union.
Контингенты, как вот в этой бумаге упоминается, интересуют американцев с точки зрения, какие страны готовы их предоставить, но ясно, что вопрос адресован к членам Евросоюза.
We explained to our interlocutors today that we noted very well that President Trump, in several of his speeches, was the first among Western leaders to clearly say that Ukraine's involvement in NATO is one of the main reasons for what is happening, that this is one of the biggest mistakes of Biden and his administration, and that if Trump were president, he would I didn't allow it. In this regard, we explained to our colleagues today that President Putin has repeatedly stressed that the expansion of NATO, the absorption of Ukraine by the North Atlantic Alliance, is a direct threat to the interests of the Russian Federation, a direct threat to our sovereignty. And therefore, we explained today the appearance of troops, armed forces from the same NATO countries, but under a foreign flag. Under the flag of the European Union, or under national flags, does not change anything in this regard. Of course, this is unacceptable to us. 2 questions. On the eve of the negotiations, the APU attacked its own Kropotkinskaya station in the Cuban, and oil flows through it, which also belongs to companies from the United States and European countries. This is Zelensky's attempt to send Trump a black branch against the background of contacts with Russia. And the second question, if I may, is not the statement of a number of you countries about the desire to be at the negotiating table, as there were no enterprises today connected with their other statements about historical rights to Ukrainian lands. As for what caused this next trick, with an attack on the energy infrastructure of Kazakhstan, in fact, now. There are many reasons to cite or guess what was at the heart of the order that someone gave in Kiev, but this only should strengthen everyone's opinion that this can't go on like this, that this person and his entire team need to be reasoned with, given a deal. Our American colleagues said that it might be possible to somehow introduce some kind of moratorium on attacks on energy facilities. We explained that we had never endangered the energy supply systems of the population, and our targets were only those facilities that directly serve the armed forces of Ukraine. They recalled that as part of the talks about the possible resumption of the Black Sea deal, the question was raised with Turkish intermediaries about how to somehow protect energy facilities. We expressed our readiness to discuss the modalities, but then Zelensky refused to do it himself. And the second question is whether it is related. Is the desire and statements of the EU, the desire to be at the negotiating table, connected with their statements, that they claim certain territories of Ukraine? I do not know, but there are such conversations going on, and politicians in Romania have been talking about it quite recently. I won't guess. Sergey Viktorovich, Zelensky said yesterday that he did not recognize the results of the negotiations between the United States and Russia. How important, in your opinion, is the participation of Zelensky himself in negotiations to achieve peace? And can he count on such participation? Well, there is no need for me to go into details here, because this topic was covered in detail by President Putin. In his interview with Pavel Zarubin not so long ago, I have nothing to add.
Final question, Channel 1.
Good afternoon, Sergey Viktorovich. It is already obvious to many that serious attempts are being made to torpedo the establishment of relations. The resumption of relations between Russia and the United States. What should Russia do in order to prevent these attempts to torpedo, in order to protect the process? And today, after 4.5 hours alone with an American, do you think that there will to restore relations with Russia is firm? In order to prevent the torpedoing of the establishment of relations between Russia and the United States, it is necessary to establish them, which we have been doing today, and, frankly, not unsuccessfully. Not all of us have discussed what divides us yet, but the approach, the conceptual approach to further work. It was determined by the presidents during their telephone conversation, and we felt the full determination, the concrete attitude of our American colleagues to advance this movement forward, as instructed by the presidents, in an active way. And we will also be engaged in this.
Как поручили президенты, активным образом, и мы этим тоже будем заниматься. Спасибо.